Welcome to the Draft Deeper podcast. This is your host, Nathan Grubel. Joining me, as always, is my producer, Kevin Black, my co host, Cole Miller, and two awesome guests. Honestly, one of my favorite pods to be listening to lately, the DraftDaq podcast. We have Corey and Albert on from the DraftDaq. Corey has also been doing a lot of cool stuff with the Hardwood Herald magazine. I love a lot of the stuff I'm seeing from on social media from the both of you guys. So, Corey, how you doing? Albert, how you doing, my friend?
Yo, thanks for having us. I'm excited to be here. I as well am a big fan of the pod. You guys have been killing it lately, and I think Albert agrees. But we love talking NBA draft, and I think on some of these prospects, I know Albert's gonna have some spice to him. You know what I mean?
I gotta say, I really appreciate the love. It feels surreal. Like I kind of just feel like Corey's sidekick right now. Corey's the
No.
guy on social media. You guys know what he's doing, but I'm just you know what? Like Corey said, I think I'm coming in. I personally don't like hot takes, but like I think Corey's been kind of portraying me as a hot take guy. So I'm like, damn, am I changing? Am I somebody else? Like, do I have a new identity? But yeah, I'm ready. I'm
They're
hyped.
not
I
hot
love.
takes.
I think whether you like it or not,
They're well
we
thought
kind of
out and articulated takes.
yeah, I think whether you like it or not, we kind of all have like a quote unquote hot take every once in a while. It's kind of unavoidable in some of the conversations that we end up having. So I'm excited for this podcast because Cole and I haven't revisited some of these G League guys in quite a while. We did an initial pod after their first game to kind of just give our quote unquote first reactions. And then we might have hit on them a little bit here and there, and we did like a wrap up to the G League season type of podcast. But other than that, we really haven't had any conversations, at least with other people. And we've had so many guests on lately. I've been very thankful that Cole and I have gotten to talk to a lot of the draft Twitter community because, as I've said on this pod multiple times before, I think that's really what it's all about. It's about engaging the community and learning from one another. So that's why I'm really excited to have you two on because, like I said, you guys have been killing it with everything you guys have been doing lately. So I just want to dive right in with probably the biggest name out of these four guys would obviously be Jalen Green. In terms of like ceiling, where these guys are being ranked, I've been a pretty firm. Like if I had like the number 2 overall pick in the draft, I would probably take Jalen Suggs. That's kind of how I felt all season. But I got to be honest, I've come around. And I've been a little back and forth, but I think Jalen Greene to me has to be that next pick off the board after Cade Cunningham. And the reason for that is that the level of star power, the level of confidence, his attitude, his demeanor, the way he approaches the game. If anyone out there's listening to Chad Ford's podcast with Shaw, with Coach Shaw, obviously he was talking about Jalen Green's work ethic and the fact that he just has that it factor, right? Like, and that's really what you're looking for when you're considering like the top overall pick in the draft, a top 3 pick in the draft. You want a guy who you know at the end of the game, you can put the ball in his hands, you can involve him in some type of offensive action, and more often than not, he's going to be able to come up with some kind of play or he's going to be able to hit a big shot. And you saw that from Jalen Greene, certainly at multiple points throughout the G League Ignite season, especially in their last game, even though they had a pretty bad loss in what was their quote-unquote first playoff game against the Raptors G League squad. At the same time, he put up 30 points in that game, and he looked like a fully functional first option for that team, not afraid to take any kind of shot. Obviously, a 3-level scorer on the wing, can hit from the outside, at times can make plays for others. We can get into how we all feel about his playmaking overall, but I think at the very least, he can make simple, smart decisions with the ball in his hands. And then if you want to talk about athleticism, he's going to come into the NBA right away, and he's going to be one of the top athletes, not only in this draft class, but in the league. He kind of has like that Zach LaVine level, floaty athletic quality to him. So I really like the package that he has overall. And my co-host Cole, everybody knows that he's also been really high on Jalen Green as well. So Cole, before we turn it over to the DraftDaq guys, why don't you kind of give your perspective in terms of where you've kind of been at on Jalen Green this whole time, and how you've been able to talk me into Jalen Green even more a little bit than where I've been at.
Yeah, so it's nice to hear you have him back above the other Jalen, and that's no easy feat. Let's be honest. But for me with Jalen Green, I've kind of been with him honestly since I caught him first in high school. And when I caught him back then, it seemed to just pop off the screen to me then, and I was like, wow, this kid is really going to be something. He seems to love the game, know the game, and really just want to destroy his opponents on the court. And that just seems to have gotten more amplified as the years have gone on with him, as he's gotten a little older and more mature, and he knows what he's doing out there. I can't really add anything to the package that you already pointed out. So I'll just put this out there that I think me, like, if I had a gun to my head, I would be comfortable taking Jalen Green over Cade Cunningham first overall. I think that's because, in my opinion, Jalen is a better scorer than anything Cade does. And I think at the end of the game, like you mentioned, the ball is going to be in Jalen's hands. And if he's better at scoring than anything Cade does, then give me that guy, because he's going to either score or make it incredibly easy for someone else to score at the end of the game because of the attention he's drawing. For me, I think that has to be a serious consideration for people at the top of the draft. Yes, Cade is a terrific playmaker, and there's a lot of great things to like about his game, and that jumbo playmakers are definitely in. But I think you really need to take a long look at Jalen Green and everything he's about. I don't think there's really a war in his offensive game either.
Ori, I know that you and Albert have talked about Jalen Green somewhat at length on your own podcast. So for my listeners, in case they haven't heard your thoughts, I'll start with you, Corey. What is your overall take on Jalen Green? How comfortable would you be with taking him with a high overall pick in this draft? And even since your podcast with Albert, when you did talk about him, have any of your thoughts kind of changed when you're looking over other guys and then you're kind of coming back and reviewing some film on Jalen Green?
No, my thoughts have been pretty consistent. I have Jalen number 2 overall on my board.
Okay.
I absolutely love this kid's game. I had a scout text me, within the last week or so, like, if he ended up being better than Mobley and Cade, they wouldn't be shocked. And I wouldn't be shocked either. Now, with that said, I would still take Cade first overall. And I think Cade's combination of scoring, shooting, playmaking, and just positional defensive versatility as well is something that I couldn't pass on. But Jalen at number 2, I've been a fan for a while. And, I think a lot of people had concerns with him coming in. Like, you mentioned Zach LaVine. Like, there's a bit of like this chucker reputation if you're not so dialed in with Jalen. And I actually think that Jalen's game is pretty nuanced for the type of player I think most people are probably going to perceive him to be. And I kind of feel like it's been like that for a while. I know that if you watch some of his AAU or his high school tape, you might get kind of that impression. But when I first was really drawn to him, it was when I watched him with the FIBA U19 team. And, just a loaded team with Cade and Mobley and Suggs and Halliburton, Kyra Lewis and Reggie Perry, and, the list goes on. And he was playing this like off-ball role and just fitting in, being athletic, playing defense, scoring opportunistically. And I was like, wow, like, this is a team guy. Like, he doesn't look out of place here. He still knows how to contribute. And then what he's capable of with the ball in his hands as a scorer. And that athleticism, it's crazy. It's going to be top tier athleticism going through any draft you find throughout the years. So obviously him really producing, I think, better than people thought in this bubble was super encouraging, because the athleticism still popped against people who have actually played in the league. The tutelage that he's gotten from playing under NBA coaching and with NBA veterans and learning NBA terminology and just going through that every day is so valuable. I can't say enough positive things about the kid. And I think that a lot of the notions people have, I know people question his defense. I thought he was pretty like incredible as a one-on-one man defender, and executing the Ignite's team concept, pushing guys to the sideline. He's always switching his stance to get guys to go to that sideline, and he's so quick that he'll beat them there. He's got incredible anticipation, getting a hand up in the player's face on shot contests. I there are things team-wise he can clean up, sure, but that is true of any young player. That's really difficult stuff to comprehend as a 18, 19-year-old kid. But I think his potential's through the roof, and just everything he displayed. I mean, I was just like, yep, this dude he's legit, he's for real. And it's crazy because Mobley's a great prospect. Suggs, I mean, he's the epitome of when you look for leadership and
Yep.
toughness and heart, and you love that. But sometimes like you see something in somebody that's innate and you can't explain, and Jalen has always just kind of popped in that way for me.
Yeah, you can't really quantify the it factor that he brings, and there really is no better word for it. It's just it. Like you just know watching Jalen Green, like he's going to end up as a star in the NBA, barring anything catastrophic happening. 2 quick points, and then I'll kick it over to Albert, and I'll let him give his thoughts on Green. You mentioned the defense. I've beat the dead horse already so many times on this podcast that like so many rookies when they first come into the NBA, like they're not good defenders. Like it takes a lot of time to actually get used to playing the game at that level of pace and getting accustomed to seeing so many different styles of offense when you're on the other end of the floor, having to guard so many different matchups, having to be involved in so many different switches. So when you talk about his defense, I agree, Corey. He was very engaged defensively for the Ignite team. And that's something you're always going to get from Green. His willingness to work, his willingness to learn, and his willingness to just try on the court at all times and not take plays off. And I really didn't see Green take any plays off. And those are all, to me, fantastic qualities for a young wing and somebody who wants to get better and excel at working at their craft. So that's obviously very important to me. And the other thing, when you talked about his offense and his level of nuance to his offensive attack, the other night I was tweeting in that Celtics Wizards game that the best thing that happened for the Celtics was when they were able to post up Jason Tatum, and they were kind of able to let the offense go through him and let some of their other guards just spread the floor and kind of let things happen naturally. And there are times when you go back and watch the G League Ignite that they let Jalen Green post up a little bit too. When he had the right guy to be able to post up against him, he either made sound decisions out of those post ups or he was able to fade away or make a step through and hit a shot himself. So like when we're talking about a kid who's that young and you're able to give the ball to him in those kind of offensive situations and he's able to make something happen, that's unusual for somebody his age too. So Albert, why don't you kind of give us some of your thoughts on Jalen Green and how you feel about him overall as well, and why you're probably high on him too.
I think one thing one of my close friends was telling me, like, hey, I've been listening to your pod and you and Corey just agree too much, and so I'm trying to change that. But yeah, I'm agreeing with Corey here too, just in the fact that I have him number 2 on my board too, and I think like even boards are like such a weird thing, but a lot of mock drafts have Evan Mobley going second. But when I compare, not that you can actually even compare the two players, but when I look at Green, there's like a killer instinct to him. Like we're watching the end of games and you can throw him the ball and he looks like he's engaged and he looks like he wants to kill somebody. And that's something I really like about Jalen Green. And then going back to what you guys talked about with the whole G League Ignite situation and all that. And I think if you look at his arc during the G League season, I think something that was really interesting is the fact that, as you mentioned, he had Brian Shaw as his coach and he had, 35-year veteran Jared Jack and Bobby Brown and Amir Johnson. I was watching them play the Iowa Wolves today. This is from a couple months back. And I just saw Amir Johnson taking threes, and I was like, man, that must have been really hard to play with. But it was interesting to watch, and like going piggybacking off of what Corey said, but I feel like that experience with that coaching and those veterans next to him, like you saw him develop and improve over the year, and that alone was really really exciting for me because you could see it, right? Like he has all the raw tools, he has all the raw athleticism. He's like Super Mario, like where he's jumping in the air and he has that like slight hang time, except like he has way more hang time. It doesn't make sense to me. And he's just up in the air. He's crazy, And so He's been just watching that, and he has all the raw stuff, but then that experience, that coaching, those teammates. Something that Corey and I talked about on the pod about Jalen Green was like going back and watching those games. You could hear how vocal Jared Jack was, and I really liked that. Like he had that ethos of like, I'm gonna be vocal and I'm gonna set the tone defensively. I'm gonna call everything out, and I think like even that experience of Jalen Green being there and hearing that and feeling that, I think all those things kind of come together and create this package where I think Jalen Green on the next level is going to be scary, like really, really scary. Beyond all the stuff that you can see with the eye, I think the arc and the experience of being in the G League, which kind of speaks to like a bigger picture thing, right? Like we just saw, isn't Justin Hardy? Jaden Hardy? I don't even know.
Jaden
The
Hardy,
Hardy
yeah.
kid.
Jaden Hardy,
Jaden
yep.
Hardy. He just committed to the G League Ignite, and I think that's going to be really interesting to watch too, and to see how this goes because we're going to talk about Kaminga, we're going to talk about Knicks, we're going to talk about Isaiah Todd, but I think these guys really benefited from this experience, and I can't freaking wait to see Jalen Green on the next level. So that's kind of how I feel.
The one thing that I can point out, Albert, I'm glad you brought up the veterans and the people he had around him, was that there are times in the NBA when you see vets interacting with rookies on the court, and not every veteran, and this speaks both to the vets that he had around him as well as Jalen Green, the player, but not every vet is the nicest to some of these rookies. Like you'll absolutely see times where a rookie will make a mistake or have a turnover or miss a read, and vets will kind of like not necessarily blast them right in like the middle of the court, right, but they'll kind of like bring them over towards the sideline, and they'll definitely have their piece and have their say with them, right? But you didn't see guys like Jared Jack or Amir Johnson have any of those type of quote unquote rough and more vocal conversations with somebody like Jalen Green. It wasn't like violent interaction in any way. At the same time, I think that speaks to their level of maturity actually leading this team and wanting to work with the young guys. But it also speaks to Jalen Green's demeanor, not necessarily wanting to argue with those veterans as well, being a sponge and wanting to soak up as much as he can, and kind of accepting that when those conversations took place, when he did make a mistake, he was more than willing to accept that he made it and learn from it and kind of move on and take that as a lesson, not necessarily take that as like a harsh criticism. And I love to see that from younger players too, right? Like when you're a rookie coming into the NBA, you need to be able to take criticism and use it to better yourself, not necessarily get frustrated or mad or let that affect you on the next possession or even the possession after. So I agree that was a big thing for all of these guys that we're going to talk about, is that they had mentors from Coach Shaw all the way down to guys like a Jared Jack or Amir Johnson, guys who were willing to work with these young guys and definitely make them better in their own right. So I love seeing that too. Cole, I guess like the last thing to really touch on Jalen Green that I want to before we kick it over to Kaminga is you don't always see Jalen Green number 1 or number 2 on a draft board. You don't always hear people talking about wanting to take him with like a top 2 pick. He's kind of slid down to number 4 or even number 5 in like some spots that I've seen on social media. So why do you think that people have been low on Jalen Green besides some of like the chucker mentality that we've kind of talked about, and do you definitely see any of those people still having that same opinion as we get closer to the draft, or do you think a lot more people are going to come around on Green kind of like we all have in this conversation?
I think people will continue to come around. There's going to be some holdouts in the chucker camp that want to be right and see him fail and be that way, but I don't envy those people, honestly. But I think you've heard me say it a couple times throughout the year, Nate, and this is probably going to be my hottest take of the night, but I think Cade has a little bit of the good boy momentum going for him, and I think that's why he kind of slides to the top on a lot of people's draft boards. He was the face of college basketball this year, and Jalen Green was in the G League. I think that still resonates with some people, especially with the mock draft community. I just want to hop on Albert's point about Jalen's progression throughout the G League season. He did that in 15 games. By game 15, this was the focal point of the G League Ignite team. That's super impressive, man. And you just got the slash line he put up, shooting efficiency just backs it up. The guy's insane.
Yeah, I mean, 46% from the field overall, almost 37% from 3, 83% from the free throw line. I mean, yeah, what more are you going to ask him to do in 15 games, playing 32 minutes a game? Like that's a legitimate high-end rookie diet for him, and he excelled. Pretty much the only bad game that I can really say that he had was in their first game, and other than that, I think he played pretty well to definitely exceeding expectations at times. So yeah, I really only have positive things to say about Jalen Green, and I think that the sky truly is the limit for the kid. Jonathan Kuminga is another guy who people have pegged as this top 5 potential NBA draft pick, and for good reason. I mean, he's 6'8". He already comes in with a pro-ready body. Definitely one of the younger prospects in this draft because he ended up reclassifying and then committing to the G League. And young in basketball age as well. He hasn't been playing or organized basketball as long as some of these other guys in this draft class as some of his peers. So when you take a look at his game, he's definitely more raw than somebody like Jalen Green's in terms of his offensive approach. He doesn't have that same nuance to his game, kind of that Corey alluded to. But what he does have is he has an insane first step. He is such a powerful line drive athlete that when he does get the step on somebody, nobody's taking him off course. He's going to get to the basket and have a chance to finish with relative ease. He showed the willingness to take over and score at times. Like, that's another thing too. When you look at some of these younger kids coming into the draft, not all of them have the willingness to like take over a game or take like 14, 15 shots a game right off the bat. But you saw that willingness from Kaminga, that willingness to not want to back down to anybody. And I really like seeing that in prospects as well. But he has some things that he needs to work on the offensive end. While I think he did an okay job at making plays for others, he still struggled with committing some turnovers. I wouldn't really call him like a 3-level scorer right now. I definitely think he needs to work on his mid-range game. And obviously his 3-point shooting, he only shot about 25% from 3. He got off to a really good start towards the beginning of the season, but you can tell his shot mechanics. He shoots probably as line drive of a 3-point shot as like I remember Dario Saric shooting when he first came into the league, and something that's definitely going to need to be corrected if he wants to be a more efficient 3-point shooter and really live up to more of his promise. But as like this potential two-way wing, you really aren't going to find many better candidates in this class than Kaminga and Albert. I'll start with you first because I know that before we started this podcast, you kind of alluded to that you are potentially higher on Kaminga than most. So why don't you kind of give your thoughts on why you think Kaminga is going to excel at the next level and where you would be comfortable taking him in the draft?
You know what's funny? I said that I'm higher than most on him, but I kind of like him at 5th, just because yeah, as much as I love Green and Suggs and Mobley, like it's hard to put Kaminga over them. I think it was this week that Mike Schmitz put up a video of Kaminga shooting in a gym, and it's fun. We're in that season now, right? We're watching guys shooting in empty gyms, and we get excited about all kinds of stuff. But just from that video, I'm watching Kaminga. I'm like, this guy has the most ripped back and shoulders I've ever seen from an 18-year-old. Like this guy literally, I don't know what I'm watching in terms of how ripped he is. But okay, the one thing that I did want to highlight, and I know Corey has a lot to say about Kaminga too, but going back to Jalen Green and his arc through the G League, right? After that first game, everyone was like, are we sure about Jalen Green? Is this guy going to be the guy that we think he is? And then when it came to Kaminga, everyone's like, oh, look at this guy, right? After his first game, and, you know, he had a really good game. And after that, as you mentioned, he tailed off a little bit. But the thing that I like about Kaminga, you mentioned that in terms of his experience in the game and his time playing, he hasn't played as much. But from what we saw in this G League season, I think there's a lot to work with there. I liked his handle. Like, yeah, he's not some super tight ball in a string type of guy, but I like some of the stuff that he was doing. I like some of the spin moves. I like that he was aggressive, and I never got the feeling that he was afraid on the court, which is exciting, you know, because you can have toolsy guys, you can have guys who can fly through the roof and whatever, but if they go missing in games and they go silent and you can't really feel them on the court, that's when you're like, damn, this guy doesn't really have star potential, right? I mean, we're watching last night, Andrew Wiggins had a pretty good game, but people forget, I mean, maybe people don't forget, but Andrew Wiggins was the first pick in the draft. And the reason why Andrew Wiggins hasn't really lived up to that spot is because he floats and he can disappear a little bit. And when I watch Kaminga, I'm like, this guy doesn't look like he's gonna float and disappear in games.
Oh, he's always engaged. That's absolutely a selling point.
Exactly. And so for me, considering how young he is, I mean, sorry, basketball wise, I think there's so much untapped potential there, and I think he showed enough of like, hey, like I've got some stuff to me, and so I think that's exciting, and I think that's why I'm higher on him, and also the fact that he's like the most ripped teenager I've ever seen in my life. So
I mentioned I believe in his ability to take somebody off a line drive or be able to attack a
mhm,
closeout and potentially get an easy chance to finish at the basket because of those physical tools
yeah,
and talents that he possesses. That's something that I'm going to be able to count on him to do in the NBA from day one. I honestly think that he has a chance to be better defensively with a lot of these guys than a lot of these guys from day one because of his physique, because of his power. That like I see him kind of playing up on defense, potentially guarding more fours in the NBA necessarily than threes. But if anybody tries to post him up, like they're not going to push him off of a spot very
right,
easily. Like sometimes when you just have this big body, guys like I talk about Tobias Harris. I bring him up in this kind of conversation a lot, but like I wouldn't consider Tobias Harris like this above average defender by any means. But what he does have, he's a physical guy. He's not afraid to bang, and I kind of see that same effort and engagement from Kaminga. And I think that he's going to be able to hold his own in man situations, whether it be on the perimeter or in the post. And that's why I think between that, he's actually pretty decent at boxing people out and going up for rebounds on both ends of the court as well. So, like, yeah, Albert, I definitely see ways in which his game can translate immediately from day one in the NBA. And while I don't think he's a perfect prospect
yeah,
offensively to come in and score a lot of points efficiently from day one, he's going to get his reps and his opportunities because of how engaged he is as a basketball player. So, Corey, I'll kick it over to you. What are some things you like and dislike from Kaminga? Feel free to get into both ends of the floor, offensively and defensively.
Yeah, so Kaminga is probably he's the one prospect in this draft that I feel like I've been closest to because his sophomore season of high school, he played at Our Savior School in Center Reach, New York, which is about a 30-second drive from the school I teach at. Like he came to the basketball team that I coach. He came to like our rivalry game. It was so close. Like he's shopping at the same Target. So I got a little bit of a soft spot for him, admittedly. But I really like Kaminga's, you both touched on it, like the aggressiveness and the fact that he's not scared to be aggressive. If you look at the number 4 pick in the 2020 draft, Patrick Williams, what's like everyone's like head over heels, but what's the one thing that everybody wants more of, right? The aggressiveness. They want him to realize his own potential. They want him to turn into, that modern day swing Kawhi type guy that he gets compared to. You don't have to worry about that with Kaminga. And and I do think that is a skill in and of itself.
Yep.
That mentality is important because you're not going to reach your ceiling if you're afraid, and he's not. Now I really like Kaminga. I think I've dropped him out of the top 5, not far. I have him at 6, but he is that modern day kind of like swing forward who could kind of go multiple positions offensively and defensively. And the name of the game in the NBA right now is versatility and being able to play multiple positions. So just you can't teach the physical tools that he has, right? And again, that is a skill in and of itself. You touched on the shot. Obviously, he didn't shoot it super well, but he had moments like in that mid-range kind of that area you probably don't want him shooting a ton of. But he had moments there, especially off the bounce, where he displayed like really slick footwork where you go, all right, he's got no problem like getting shots off the bounce. And I think he can extend his range. And so, he is more of like the guy you're projecting forward out of, him and Green, but like it's really easy to see his path into becoming like this really impactful superstar kind of guy. And you touched on it, like he had that monster first game where you looked at him, you're like, this 18-year-old kid who's playing his first professional game is straight up bodying professional players, like grown men, bodying them, going in, dip in the shoulder, creating space, getting to the hoop. And for the one thing I hope for him is that I hope he goes to a situation where the development staff is on point, because he's just got so many tools. And then, we talk about it defensively, like he's going to be a guy who could defend multiple positions. He's got the ability to do that laterally, and he displayed, some pretty impressive instincts to block some shots off ball. I think that, like, again, we mentioned with Green, you mentioned rookies are typically not great defenders. Professional principles are really difficult. And even when you comprehend these principles, it's the speed of the game and being able to comprehend them quicker than the offense is getting to their spots. So I do think he's got a little bit of a ways to go, and you have to be patient with him there. But I think he's just going to be one of those guys like Green, where there are going to be nights where you just look at him and you're like, whoa, I just got a flash forward to what he could potentially become. And then it's just going to be about consistency and a coaching staff putting him in the right spots and putting him with the right team. And that, could be said for a number of prospects, and it's going to be up to the teams and development staff, because I think he's going to work at it and he's going to want it, and he's certainly not going to be afraid to go get it. It's just going to be, are these guys going to be able to mold this ball of clay that is Jonathan Kaminga?
I guess the main disclaimer for me, but before I let Cole have his say, because Corey, I think you and Cole are both in the same camp that Kaminga's kind of dropped out of each of your respective top 5 radars. My biggest disclaimer with him, it's a positive in that you talked about Jalen Green's coordination as a scorer, his ability to gather, his footwork, his versatility around the basket in terms of his hang time and what he's able to do, kind of hit shots at different angles around the rim. I think Kaminga has a lot of that same body coordination as well. He's also that level of athlete. But the one thing I don't see from Kaminga consistently is his touch. Whether it be around the basket, whether it be on a jump shot, you can just tell sometimes when you look at players and they don't have that soft touch when the ball comes off their hands, and it's just going to float down through the net. And that is something that concerns me as a wing scorer who you might be looking at with a top 5 pick. You want him to be this volume scorer in time. Sometimes guys figure that out, but the majority of the time they never exactly figure that out, and I don't really know everything that goes into that. It seems to be like, at least from my experience in scouting, it's one of those things like you either have it or you don't. And I've mentioned this multiple times on this podcast, but like Cole and I are Sixers guys and we watch Philly the most, and somebody like Ben Simmons, for example, for everything that he can do with all of his strength and his power and his coordination, because he's that level of athlete, he doesn't always display that level of touch that you need to be an elite finisher or somebody that can potentially become a jump shooter in time. And while Jonathan Kaminga is much further along as a jump shooter than somebody like Ben Simmons is, with their finishing around the basket, you kind of notice that lack of touch with the both of them. And that's definitely something that concerns me in terms of Kaminga being more of a volume scorer. Can he do plenty of things in time, in one-off situations, in unique situations where he's called upon to do them? I definitely think he can, and that plays into his upside as like this potential top 5 pick in the draft. But in terms of how much volume I would throw at him, I'm not sure how efficient he's going to be of a volume scorer, and that gives me a little cause to pause. Cole, why don't you talk about your feelings on Kaminga, why he's dropped out of your kind of like top 5 radar, and if you share any of those concerns that I just laid out about Kaminga's shot-making ability and his touch?
Yeah, I do. I mean, let me just quickly say the positives. You guys mentioned them a little bit already. I mean, physique is impressive. His first step, obviously, very impressive as well. That mentality that he holds, that he does think he can do all the things he wants to do on the basketball court and that he attempts to do. So definitely deserves high marks for all that. I guess where I fall a little bit lower on him in terms of my concerns, I think there's a little bit more work to do on the defensive end and with his three-point shot. And you got into it a little bit there, Nate, with the lack of touch around the rim and how that kind of translates to his shot as well. He shot 62.5% from the line this G League season, as well as 24.5% from 3. Really not that great, if we're being honest. And it was on pretty steep volume as well. So I agree. I think the volume should be dialed back for him. I think he really needs to come in and improve that three-point shot. Like, he needs to get that corner 3 down in his first year. if, pretty soon if he's going to be this top 5, top 6 guy that we all think he is and pan out and make good on that promise, because right now he's not close to that. And I want to throw a name out there for you guys. If the shot really doesn't come around, I mean, you mentioned it with the explosive first step. Like, is this like a Thaddeus Young starter kit almost without a shot?
Interesting. Could be.
Look, Thaddeus Young is. I'm a Bulls guy. Thaddeus Young's my guy. I can't. Let's not slander Thad Young's name on here. He was one of the joys of this season. but
okay.
To talk about that lack of touch and feel, we have seen that improve in his kind of archetype a little bit. Like Jalen Brown is a guy who I think had a lot of the same concerns coming into the league and took some time, and I feel like that's kind of the path. And I feel like with Brown, he could have gone a number of ways depending on where he went and what organization. And like obviously credit to him because he's the one working, and he definitely has. I mean, he was a brilliant guy who with a great work ethic, but a lot of it also comes down to who you're developing around. And I feel like Boston was really great for his development. So I feel like I agree with all of those points for sure. But I feel like there's a path. Like it's not, and that's why you're drafting him this high.
Yep. No, there's absolutely a path for improvement. I always believed in Jalen Brown. I definitely, from just some intel that I had before the draft process, as well as kind of seeing him play a little bit at Cal and then seeing him kind of hit his first few years with the Celtics, I just knew that he had a package there to be able to handle the ball, make plays at a high level, and kind of turn himself into a 3-level scorer. Like I always bet on his upside. I definitely thought that he was deserving of the top 3 pick in his draft class, and rightfully so. He's definitely exploded onto the scene this year more than ever as that level of player. And if Kaminga can develop into something even close as like a Jalen Brown and what he's become this year, then yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's top 5 in this draft. That's potentially top 3 in this draft. We're going to be perfectly honest, because that type of wing is always in high demand. And I agree with you guys that there absolutely is a path for Kaminga to be able to develop and get better and turn himself into a potential all-star. So that's why you kind of have to hold him in high regard one way or the other. And I don't think that there's any realm at which I would let him slip past like a top 6 pick in the draft. So but with that being said, I want to move to Daishen Nix, who I think we're all probably in agreement that like Isaiah Todd is the quote-unquote most interesting of the 4 players, but I actually think that Nix is the most interesting of the 4 players. And the reason why is I'm going to be the most excited to figure out what his outcome ends up being and to learn lessons from it. Because if we go into his body and his physique and his size at the point guard spot, I think we all have to agree that's probably the biggest concern about his game. Like, it's one thing to hear like a forward or a center. You have these questions and concerns about whether they can keep weight off or if they have problems keeping weight off. Like, that's one thing. But to hear that about a guard, I mean, that definitely concerned me right off the bat. And then you kind of have to go into how that translated on the court. Like, you can go into his IQ and how smart of a playmaker he is in terms of his making decisions. And I definitely think that there were times where he had some turnovers that weren't necessarily his fault. Like, he saw a play emerging like 1 or 2 steps ahead. And I think at times even some of the other more experienced G League guys didn't necessarily anticipate what Nix was seeing. And that speaks volumes to the type of playmaker. Like, that's like Rondo type level stuff in certain situations. So that definitely impressed me. But in terms of him being able to score on the ball, like, you can tell he's not an above the rim athlete by any means. He's pretty ground bound. If he's getting close to the basket, he's not elevating off the floor really at all. And he's an easy guy to block a shot on. I don't really see him as having this great finishing package. And then it's not that he can't shoot from a standstill, but he never really showed the willingness or the desire to shoot from the standstill, particularly from 3. And that showed, I mean, he only shot like 18% from the 3-point line on about 2 threes per game. So not like the highest volume by any means, but at the same time, those aren't encouraging signs. And he shot 38% overall from the floor. So obviously there are a lot of concerns about his offensive game. I'm not even getting into the defensive portion. But Corey, how do you feel about Daishen Nix overall as a prospect? Has he definitely slid into like this second round territory? Like I've even seen him drop off of some top 60 type boards like completely. Like I think the general public isn't as enthused on Daishen Nix nearly as much as they were before the G League season started.
Yeah, I mean, I've also seen him, slipping quite a bit. I think out of, these guys, I think obviously, I think the play and kind of being a part of this G League team is probably a good thing for his development. But I think for his draft stock, I think that he probably would have benefited more had he gone to college. Watching him play, a lot of times when you see guys get downhill, be like, wow, like he kind of hits these holes like a running back. With Nix, it's more like a fullback, right? Like his outcome to me, it's like, is this dude going to be able to stay in shape? Straight up. Like to me, that's the thing. And I think he was in a little bit better shape in high school. I read something today that, he was recovering from COVID and that had an effect on his weight. So if that's potentially true, you got to kind of empathize with that a little bit. But I think that the playmaking is really, really impressive. And a lot of times when you start getting down to the late first round, you start getting down to the second round, can you find like an elite skill that a player has? A lot of times to me, the jack of all trade guys, it's harder for them the lower you get in the draft to be useful because, there's going to be guys on the roster who do your jack of all trade thing better than you do already. So for me, like if he has like an elite skill, which I think his passing kind of is, like in his vision, I agree with you. Like, sometimes when you see the play ahead of time and somebody doesn't see it, you're going to get a turnover and it looks like it's your fault, but it isn't. But like some of the passes that he was executing at his age, like the live dribble, left-handed, like weak side passes, like that's some pretty serious stuff. So, I really do buy into his passing. And for me, it's just, it comes down to, man, like, are you going to get in shape? Are you going to take it seriously? Like, yeah, he might not ever look like Jonathan Kaminga physically. That just might not be his body. But I'm all about, can this kid be in NBA level shape? And because you have to be in the best shape possible playing in this modern NBA where you have to cover so much ground. Every split second counts. And if you're a little heavier than you should be, you're costing yourself split seconds. And when you don't have those other skills to fall back on, the shooting, the and even the defense, it's going to be held against you. The little things are going to be held against you more. Whereas like you're not holding some of those little things against Kaminga because he can make up for it in other ways. Like with Nix, he doesn't get that same rope, that same leeway. So I think he showed some touch at times as a finisher. And he can obviously finish through people sometimes given his body, but I'm really just interested to see his weight because I would take a flyer on him at the end of the first round personally because I do think his passing is really, really special for a prospect. But, it's all like how special is your vision and your passing if you can't get on the floor?
I question if we've laid out the archetype of point guard that is much better in like a backup type role. Like when I'm watching Nix, I understand that his playmaking at times can look otherworldly. But as Corey just outlined and kind of what I was talking about, if you don't have those other parts to your game and you can only be like this playmaker and this table setter for others, and you can't necessarily have the offense look at you and kind of have that trust to be able to make a play yourself to score the basketball when everything breaks down around you, then I don't really see like a starter upside for that type of point guard. Do you kind of feel the same way, Albert? Like, what are some of your thoughts about his potential upside, if any, as a scorer, and kind of the balance between those two things and what that can mean for like a starting point guard in the league versus someone who's much better off coming off the bench as like a third guard and leading a second unit?
I think what Corey said about him moving more like a fullback. I thought of him more as like a gadget play type of thing where you bring in like a defensive tackle at the 1 yard line and you're hoping he could just like plow in there. That's more of what I saw with Knicks because geez, like there was one play against like I think it was against the Erie Bayhawks. He had like an open lane for a layup and he got up maybe 12 to 13 inches off the ground. And I was just like, yikes, like that's really tough, you know? And like once again, like I hope I don't come off as like fat shaming or anything like that. It's just like we're talking about a guy that teams are potentially going to look at, as Corey mentioned, late first round, early second, or whatever. But I don't know, like when I compare him, like, okay, let's say we're talking about late first, early second. There are going to be guys on the board there that for me are a little bit more interesting. Like a guy like Isaiah Wong, he's like a personal guy for me. Like I kind of like him from Miami. I thought he has some nice like third guard scoring potential. Guys like Miles McBride. There are going to be other guys there where you put Knicks next to those guys and you wonder and you ask the question that you just asked me. Like I could potentially find a second or third guard here. Do I want the guy who struggles to stay in shape, or do I want these other guys who have a little bit more pop to them? And so, you know, with Knicks, I think like even defensively, there's some possessions like I'm watching him like trying to deny and stuff, and like his feet are like just grounded, like cement blocks are. He had like cement blocks for feet, and he's just like all over the place. And I think that was a little discouraging for me. I do want to give him some credit, you know, with the stuff that you guys talked about, the playmaking. Some of the passing is sick. Like I don't want to discredit that. But then, you know, Corey and I on our latest pod, we talked about all the elite level passers that are in this draft, and there are tons of passers in this draft that you might be able to find in that range as well. Like, you know, who knows like what might happen with the board, but I don't know. Like for me, like if I was a GM, I don't think I would touch him. And maybe that obviously that's just me. But I think I would let another GM take a bet on him and hope that he gets in shape. And like even if he does get in shape, right? What are we looking at? Like I don't know. Like when Corey and I talked about Knicks, like I thought of like Raymond Felton because Felton's another guy who struggled with his weight as a smaller guard. And I just don't know. Like if he could be Raymond Felton, then yeah, you take a flyer on him in the second round and let him be your third guard. But I there are too many question marks for me with him. And like his weight leads to a lot of other questions too. And so if I was a GM, I think I would stay away and let another GM take a bet on him.
That's exactly why, to me, he's the most interesting player, not even just among these guys, but arguably in this entire draft class, because this is really going to be an experiment of your ability to process and understand the game at so much of a higher level than like 80 to 85% of your peers. Not even just necessarily in your position class, but in the NBA overall. Like we could probably all agree that his IQ, at least as a passer and his ability to see things and make a play on offense, he's probably going to be in like the top 15, 20% of players in the NBA. Like that's how potentially gifted of a playmaker this kid is. But how do you weigh that with everything else, both physically and the other parts of that game? Like what type of player does that translate into? Like, are we all going to be wrong about our classification of this guy being like this second round talent who can't necessarily break into like a starters type role in the league? Like that's I'm perfectly ready for any possible outcome with Knicks, and I would gladly accept being wrong on that level of a projection on him. And don't worry, Albert, we're not fat shaming on this podcast. I would never fat shame on this podcast. Not that I'm a professional athlete, but as somebody who struggled with maintaining his weight over the course of his life, I get everything that goes along with that. So Knicks has a fan in me, and I really want to root for him, and I hope that he proves all of us wrong. But Cole, where are you at on Knicks? What else do you have to throw into the conversation on him?
Yeah, I'd like to root for Knicks too. I mean, I think we all like the guy who can pass really well and make it look fun on the basketball court and fun to play with. But I just have too many questions, and you guys hit the big one. It's his body. And if you're thinking about taking him in the first round, you really need to ask yourself, all right, where's his physique at right now? Where is it at? Where's it going to be at in 3 years, 5 years? And really assess that and think and find out if it's worth it for you to take him with the first round and guaranteed contract like that. I don't. I think beyond the body, there's too many other questions offensively. This kid doesn't have a 3-point shot yet. There's no chance he's Raymond Felton. He doesn't shoot off the move like that, and he never will. I don't think.
Right.
So I don't know. I think he's. I don't want to put the nail in the coffin too soon, but I think this kid is pretty much destined for overseas at some point. But I'd love to be wrong too.
I liked a lot of the names that Coach Shaw used for comparing a lot of his guys when he was on Chad Ford's podcast, as I alluded to earlier. The only name that I really didn't like was when he threw out Andre Miller's name for Knicks, because I think Andre Miller was a much better defender at the guard spot than people give him credit for. It's not just that he was that big, but he was very intense as a player overall. You can compare him in terms of the playmaking from being like this bigger point guard, this bigger pure point guard. But that was really the only one that gave me cause to pause, and that really leads me to think like I don't really have any other names to compare Knicks. Like he's a pretty unique case study at the point guard spot. So yeah, like I've said, I'm going to be very intrigued to see what happens with his career arc overall, where he lands, how he develops, and the type of role he's going to be able to carve out in the league, or if he's somebody that ends up overseas because everything just didn't quite break right for him. With that being said, we're going to move on to the last guy that we're talking about on the pod tonight, would be Isaiah Todd. You can throw out a lot of interesting scenarios in terms of development arcs for him, where he ultimately translates, how his game ends up developing. But man, the more that I look and study his jump shot, what he brings to the table at that size, at 6'10", the fact that he was able to shoot 36% from three during the G League Ignite season. He shot 82% from the free throw line. The more that I watched kind of some of the decision making that he brought, it's not that he has like this crazy handle or that he's this amazing face-up playmaker, but like when he got himself caught like under the basket, or he got himself caught on the move, like he was able to make the easy pass out, and he was able to avoid turnovers at times, which for me, I mean, that really intrigued me. Like he played 24 minutes a game, but with how much he ended up having the ball in his hands, whether he was shooting it or he was making the decision on the move, he only had 1.5 turnovers per game. And it's not necessarily all about the assists and how many assists you have to turnovers. If you're shooting in any type of volume and you're averaging under 2 turnovers per game, that speaks volumes to me. And I kind of alluded to that multiple times on the podcast as well. Like he took 11 shots per game in those 24 minutes, which we talked about Kaminga having a healthy volume of shots. He took about a little over 15 per game. So Todd was only 4 shots per game behind him. So like I said, that balance, that level of being able to either make a quick decision when you get yourself in trouble, or having different ways to find yourself get shots, whether that's attacking a closeout, shooting off the catch, shooting off the move even at times, as Cole and I were talking about before we fired this podcast up. Like I really liked a lot of the things that Isaiah Todd brought to the table. And I really think that I don't know if I'm as high on him at like the back end of the first round. Like that's probably where I would be comfortable drafting him. I don't necessarily see like this star level outcome for him as some others have talked about on social media. Like, man, if this kid really puts it all together, like what could we have in the NBA? I think that just given his size, his functional athleticism, his willingness to make plays on the defensive end, block shots from the weak side, being able to hold himself together in a one-on-one matchup in the post, especially as he continues to add to his frame and bulk out a little bit. Like, what if he becomes this Morris twin type player in the NBA, where he becomes this sought after type forward who can stretch the floor for you? You know, he's not going to make a ton of mistakes on either end of the floor, and he's just going to be a really solid contributor at that forward spot for years and years. Like, I think that that's a very reasonable arc for his career to take shape. And like if that's the case, then maybe we are undervaluing him as like this late first round type prospect. Maybe we need to look at him, look at drafting him sooner. Cole, I know you had a name for him that you popped over to me, and I'd see this name as more of like a ceiling for Todd if he really does put it all together. I think it's a pretty lofty ceiling for him to potentially live up to. But what was that name that you had for me, Cole? And what do you think about Todd's game overall?
Yeah, so let me first start off by saying I like the Morris twins. I think that's a nice medium. I just think his profile is based more around going forward. I think he's just going to be built more around his shooting. So for me, I kind of came to the conclusion that I think there's a Rashard Lewis type ceiling in there for him. He came into the G League and exceeded all expectations, in my opinion, especially as a shooter. You touched on it, Nate. He was doing some stuff off screens and looking very fluid doing it. I threw on some Rashard Lewis tape from 05 this morning, and lo and behold, Rashard Lewis is doing the same thing, and Isaiah Todd is doing the same thing that Rashard Lewis is doing, and posting up in the short corner and turning around and fading and hitting tough jump shots, with making it look really easy too. So yeah, I think that's in there for him, and I think the Morris twins had this element of toughness about them that kind of defined their profile, and the shooting kind of came around for them as they got in the league. So I think Isaiah Todd, from that standpoint, is further along as a shooter than both the Morris twins were at this age. So I think he's exceeded expectations, and I think that's a sign for things to come. And I think that's why the Rashard Lewis upside is in play.
Albert, how do you feel about Isaiah Todd, some of the names that we've thrown out? How are you kind of projecting his game moving forward?
I'm kind of floored right now by the Rashard Lewis comparison, because
Me too. I love it.
It just connected in my brain, and I'm like, okay, like, am I willing to now put him in the lottery? Like, dude, I freaking love that comparison, because for me, whenever I watch Isaiah Todd, and I know I've texted this to Corey maybe like 95 times already, but I always think of like something that the podfather Bill Simmons talks about all the time. When you're looking at bigs, especially Isaiah Todd's 6'10", right? We're talking about guys this size. When you watch their gait and the way that they run up and down the court, I think it's really interesting to watch how fluid and how natural it looks. Isaiah Todd looks so damn fluid when he's like just walking and moving and running on the court. It doesn't make sense to me. Like, I'm watching him play and I'm like, he's not human. Like, I can't believe how silky smooth he is, just in terms of his movement and like just his stance and everything. And then you see him shoot a ball and it's like, God damn, like, what is that? Like, I was watching one of their games today, and he was just like catching the ball from the elbow, going in triple threat, and he just like doing stuff, And I was just like, this is so beautiful to watch. And I'm like really starting to, it got to a point where I was like questioning myself. I'm like, why are people not talking about this more? And then, like, shouts to Mavs Draft on Twitter. He posted a video today of Isaiah Todd and some of his passing chops. And I was like, if you start putting these things together, something I said before we started recording today, I think his absolute floor is Mike Scott. And as you guys mentioned, I think Cole mentioned it, Mike Scott is not a bad player. He's been in the league a long time, played for a couple teams. And I think that's his floor. And if Rashard Lewis is his ceiling, sign me up, dude. If like, I'm a New York guy, huge Knicks fan. If the Knicks are sitting there at, I don't know, where are we, 22 and 24, whatever, and some of the other guys that I love are off the board, I'd grab Isaiah Todd there, man. Especially, man, Cole, you're messing me up with this Rashard Lewis comp now. Like, I'm gonna be thinking about this all night. I love it, but yeah, I'm really high on Isaiah Todd just because he does stuff on the court that doesn't make sense to me in terms of his size. And as you mentioned, like, he shot 82% from free throw line, 36% from three, and that's something Corey and I we love when we're thinking about how that translates to the next level. And so I'm super high on him, way higher on him than I am Knicks for sure.
If I could hop back in and bounce off a point you made, Nate, about how much the ball was in his hands for the G League team. Yeah, his usage rate was 23.3%. Kaminga's was 24.5. That's really not a big difference, and Todd did take very good care of the ball. I think that's another very positive indicator for what he could handle from a volume standpoint.
Yeah, two quick things, and then I'll kick it over to Corey. I just want to chime in really quick. So, in multiple interviews that you've heard, anybody close to that G League Ignite team talking about all four guys as a whole, you hear the word consistent thrown around in practices and in scrimmage settings about Isaiah Todd the most. And that really jumps out to me because we harped on Jalen Greene having this stellar work ethic and him being a gym rat, and him doing everything he possibly can to get better. Jonathan Kaminga being an electric competitor on the floor on both ends. Daishen Nix obviously having this innate ability to process the game, and being able to get up and down the floor at the very least and make plays for others. But with Todd being the guy who potentially boosted his stock the most, who got back on people's radars and proved it not only to the teammates, but also to a coaching staff this early in his development, that really sticks out to me personally. And the other thing I'll say is that before Corey might have any other names to throw in the pot here for some comparisons to look at for Isaiah Todd, every name that we're bringing up these are guys that have been around in the NBA, who had lengthy careers or are in the middle of having a lengthy career. So like that's another thing that really sticks out to me. Like we can talk about guys who have enormous upside, but also have these like basement level floors that like they could be out of the league after like their first 4 or 5 years. But like if we're talking about all these comparisons for Todd that can have careers of like 10 plus years, then like why are we keeping him like so low on a potential board or like with where we're thinking about drafting him? Like, yeah, I think he kind of has to rise if this is really the type of outcome that we're seeing for him. What do you think, Corey?
I'm also a believer in Todd, and I think he is a first rounder. And what I like about his game is that you're not going to have to dumb it down at the NBA level, like you are going to have to do potentially to some of these later first round, early second round prospects. Like when you get to this area again, like a lot of these guys were the man in college, and they're going to have to step into a situation where they are no longer that. So like, can you evolve into being more of a role player versus like, this primary role you might have experienced in college? With Todd, like you know that he is going to find a role on NBA teams because his game was made for that. I love the Rashard Lewis comp, even the Michael Scott comp. You wanted me to throw another one out? Like, where can you not envision him kind of playing the same role that the Bulls have had Lauri Markkanen playing the last like 2 years? All Markkanen's been doing is like spotting up, shooting threes, attacking closeouts, rebounding sometimes, and trying to sit in a drop and protect the rim. Like, is Isaiah Todd going to be that far away from this version of Lauri Markkanen? Like,
I'll tell you, he's going to be better on defense more likely than not. For sure.
I could foresee that, and especially if that three ball continues to evolve. And, I like there are more intricacies to his game besides just like spotting up, pick and pop, attacking closeouts. Like you can give it to him in the mid post, in the short corner. He does have that slick fadeaway. He's able to jab step you, get to the rim. So like if you wanted to give the ball to him a little bit more, he can probably do stuff at the next level, even though that's not going to be something he's probably tasked with too often. But you can do it in spurts. So, if the offense is going through a little, misstep for a couple of minutes, you can kind of maybe use him to jumpstart it because, like you alluded to, he's not afraid to let it fly and get shots up. So, I think that's valuable, especially that you can have him be in a bench role like that early on. But I just think his game is so easily transferable to the NBA level. I mean, what team isn't looking for a big at his height, with his fluidity, to space the floor? It's very highly coveted. So I don't have questions about his game translating. It's going to be, all right, you have the skills, you have the fluidity, the athleticism. Are you going to be efficient? And if he can be efficient at his job, I think that he is kind of a safe pick in that regard. Because, again, I think his game is just so simplified. So, I'm not worried that he's not getting to the line a bunch. He's not going to be a primary. I don't need him to do that. I just need him to be a role player. And I think he's more than capable of excelling in that role at the next level.
I kind of agree. And like we can talk about potential negatives for him, but I really don't have many. And I think the negatives that I would have about his game, obviously he's going to need to get better at play recognition and processing the game from a mental standpoint on both ends of the floor for the full amount of minutes that he's actually playing on the court. But I mean, you can say that about almost every other rookie. So like, is that really that harsh of a criticism for somebody like Todd? I would say no. It's something to monitor, but a lot of kids are going to have that same issue. But the other thing is, you just pointed out, Corey, that you probably aren't drafting him to be like this first or second option on a team. Like you're drafting him to be a role player and operate within himself. And like, I don't necessarily see him being this awesome shot creator. Like when he does try to get into like that shot jacker mode, he can kind of get a little too comfortable leaning on that jump shot. He'll fade back a little too far, and you'll see some of those air balls take place. He gets a little too comfy at times, but like, yeah, if you rein him in, you sit him down, you get him understanding concepts on both ends of the floor, and you get him to buy into the role that you envision him having on your team. Like yeah, his athletic package, which by the way, he's also a potential freak athlete. None of us mentioned that yet. But
For real.
like that's also important to take into account as well. So like, yeah, like, man, the only reason why I didn't love the Rashard Lewis comp, and I told Cole this, it's fine as a ceiling, but like Rashard Lewis was absolutely prolific from the perimeter, from 3-point range, but if Todd can get there as a shooter, in some of those different situations where Lewis was able to can shots, especially for some of those Orlando Magic teams down the stretch, then yeah, like the sky could be the limit in terms of this kid's ceiling as like a role type player, as like a third, fourth option on a good team, and that's why I really like the Morris Twins comparison for him, because they've been incremental cogs from a role player standpoint on so many good teams over the years. Like yeah, they change teams a lot, but that's because that type of player and what they ultimately bring to the table is in such high demand that when one of them is available to be had on like a free agent market or like a trade market, like yeah, like they want that player to be thrown in on a deal, they want to sign them because they know that they're going to be valuable in tight spots and they play a position of need. So I kind of see the same level of outcome for Todd. So yeah, I think we're all in agreement that maybe we need to all value him a little higher if we don't already, and that's definitely a good question to pose our listeners out there as well, if anybody's had some questions or reservations about Todd. But guys, that was awesome. This truly was one of my more favorite pods because I really like talking about all of these guys. I thought the G League Ignite team was such a fun experiment. I think it definitely came out as a positive outcome for all parties, and I can't wait to see what somebody like Jaden Hardy ends up doing for the G League Ignite team next year. I really think this is going to be a beneficial development program for players and a solid option other than college moving forward. So my level of excitement is through the roof for the draft, as it all is for all of us. But I thank Corey and Albert. I really do thank you guys for coming on the show this week. Corey, before we wrap up, I want you to tell our audience a little bit about what you've been able to do with the Hardwood Herald. If anybody hasn't seen that, I think that's a really special, unique, and fun project that you've gotten yourself involved in. So why don't you tell my audience about that a little bit?
Yeah, so I just released about a week ago issue 2 of the Hardwood magazine, which honestly is a project that I never saw myself doing. I never had like dreams of owning my own magazine. The draft season last year was just so strange and so prolonged that I wanted to find a creative way to put out a big board. We're draft addicts. You're sitting there, you put so much work into that last draft. I mean, it became a chore almost because it just kept dragging on and being pushed back. And I was like, you know what? I'm not just like releasing an Excel spreadsheet. Like I work too hard on this draft. I want to do something cool. And I'm like, all right, well, I got the YouTube channel that's, doing pretty well with my player breakdowns. Maybe I should release, video. And I was like, no, other people are going to do that. And I was sitting around watching a documentary on this skateboarding magazine that I used to read as a kid. And I was like, maybe I should put out a magazine. And I thought it was crazy. I woke up the next day and I still kind of thought it was a cool idea. So I was like, maybe I can get other, kind of draft minds to contribute and put together like this draft themed magazine. And I put it out. I didn't know if anyone was going to buy it, but I was like, you know what? It was cool. So if no one buys it, I know it was this cool project. And it sold out really fast in only like a couple of days. So, it kind of allowed me to continue on. And I'm going to do another issue for the draft. But this past issue, issue 2, was more NBA themed. So, I got a lot of really good writers. Jonathan Macri from Knicks Film School. Adam Taylor from Celtics Blog. Matt Brooks from Nets Daily. Tyler Rucker from Backcourt Violation, Tyler Metcalf, another great draft guy, just a bunch of really good writers. And then I did some really cool interviews. I interviewed Tom O'Grady. He's the first creative director the NBA ever had. So we talked about like working with David Stern every day and getting to meet Michael Jordan before he was Michael Jordan and designing the Phoenix Suns like 1993 championship jerseys and the Knicks rebrand and like all of he did every cool design from the 90s. It was a really fun conversation. I interviewed the Through the Wire podcast. That was amazing. it's this cool project that I think is just really been a bright spot for me. And it's an independent magazine, so I'm able to do whatever I want with it. So I themed it to look like a comic book. It's all illustrated. I'm a maniac. I put coloring book pages in it. Like, I you can get as crazy as you can. And I think in this digital age we live in, there's something fun and nostalgic about like looking back and thinking about what we used to read in physical formats as a kid, and doing it in limited, kind of capacity. It's been a really cool project.
No, I'm personally, when I see you put out the content for Corey, I'm blown away, especially when you talked about the art portion of everything and how you designed it. Like, I am not a creative artist by any means, so you probably wouldn't see me doing something like that, and that's another reason why I'm so blown away by it. But yeah, all the people you have involved, all of the content that's actually in those issues, to me is incredible. So job well done. I would have bought one already, but the damn things sell out before I can even find the link on social media. So issue 3, Corey, you better set aside an issue for me, and I'll gladly buy one from
I'm gonna
you.
need you guys to contribute.
That would be an honor. That would truly be an honor, and
Seriously.
I'd be happy too. But seriously, thank you so much for sharing about that. My audience, definitely follow Corey on social media, and follow Albert as well. Albert, where can my audience find the both of you guys on social media, and how can they listen to your DraftDaq podcast?
You can find me on Twitter at I've been thinking about this. Maybe I need a rebrand. My Twitter handle is so boring. It's just my name. It's Albert OEGHIM. So that sounds really boring. But hey, I did want to say I really appreciate you guys having us on the pod today. Like, this has been such a crazy experience, and I just I give Corey all the credit. This guy just brought me on and was like, let's do this, and we've been ripping and running ever since. And if you guys you guys can find us on Spotify, on Apple Pods, wherever, pretty much anywhere you get your pods. Just look up the DraftDaq is the name of our pod, and we're busy, man. We're getting busy. We're pumping out as much content as we can. And as a little parting gift to all of your listeners, I'm gonna drop one hot take that I really didn't want to, but after our conversation about Isaiah Todd, and I'm actually, I wonder how you guys feel about this. Maybe this is a perfect place to end. But
Producer Kevin loves hot takes, so go right ahead.
I want to throw this at our host because I want to hear how you guys feel. Corey knows the disdain that I have for Jalen Johnson. I really can't wrap my head around liking him. It's been a real struggle for me. I'm at a point where I have Isaiah Todd above Jalen Johnson for me. So I'm gonna drop that there and let you guys riff on that because I'm serious. Like, Jalen Johnson's hard for me.
Let me stop you there, and I want to leave this as a teaser because we talked about it a little bit in the DM.
Yeah.
We're gonna do Jalen Johnson as the home and home.
Okay.
We're gonna do Jalen Johnson as the home and home. So, if you want to know, when you guys come on our show, that's where you'll get the Jalen Johnson answer.
Hear that, everybody? Now,
'cause I'm excited
if they
about
weren't
it
already before, I sure hope that you will, because like I said, it's been one of my favorite pods. But now you really do have to subscribe to the DraftDaq show, because if this is going to be a home and home series, I mean, I told Corey in the DMs that before a lot of stuff happened, like, Jalen Johnson was one of my guys in this draft. Like I wanted everybody to be known, like, you better watch this guy for a potential top 5 pick. So I definitely have enough to say on Jalen Johnson, so I would be happy to return that favor, absolutely. So with that being said, thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. If you aren't subscribed already, please, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, our YouTube channel, wherever you feel comfortable listening to a podcast, subscribe, download, rate, leave us a 5-star review. It's absolutely appreciated for me to be able to see some of that feedback. It means a lot to me. And follow us on Twitter at DraftDeeper to be able to talk with us nonstop. We're always talking draft. We're always talking hoops, NBA. This episode is one of 2 episodes that we're going to be dropping over the next week here. We do have an NBA playoff preview pod that we're going to be recording here. We're recording this one on Thursday, May 20th. We're going to be recording the NBA pod on Friday, May 21st. Hopefully we can get that out before too much of the actual first round of the playoffs have started. So definitely keep an eye out. We're going to be doing both draft coverage as well as round-by-round previews as we move through the playoffs here. So a lot of podcasts coming. I can't wait to hop on the DraftDaq podcast with some of these guys and some of the writers that Corey mentioned too, that he's had be involved with the Harwood Herald. I'm hoping to have some of those guys on as guests in the coming weeks as well. I have more people lined up, so definitely stay tuned to our podcast. And thank you so much again, everyone, for listening. Have a wonderful rest of your week.